Hi everyone, I'm Deana Driver. I'm an author, an editor, and a book publisher in Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm going to read a story today from Fun on the Farm 3. It's one of the 3 books in the Fun on the Farm series, True Tales of Farm Life. And this is a story called Country Wedding Calamities. There's nothing like a wedding celebration that starts on a farm and ends in a ditch. It becomes an epic tale that is retold for decades after it happened. My family's farm is a 90-minute drive north of Edmonton near the town of Athabasca, Alberta. It's a 10-hour drive from Regina, the city where my then fiancé Al had been raised and where we were intending to start our new life together. 9 of Al's friends, all of whom were still attending high school in Regina, were not deterred by the distance or the winter driving conditions in January 1976. They rented 2 large Chryslers and headed out for an adventurous weekend to celebrate the wedding of their buddy Big Al. This group of Saskatchewan teens had arrived in Athabasca at about supper time on the Friday night. They phoned my family's farm to let us know they'd checked into the motel and would meet us at the church later for the wedding ceremony rehearsal. "Tell them to come to the farm," my mum said, as I stood in the hallway of the farmhouse playing with the 8-foot-long telephone cord while I chatted with our friends. I was a little surprised by Mum's response, but I should not have been. One of the fascinating attributes of most farm women is the ability to, on a moment's notice, rustle up enough extra grub to feed almost everyone in the neighborhood, which by rural Western Canadian standards includes anyone who lives within a 40-mile radius. I'd watched my mother do this many times while I was growing up, and I was always astounded. For example, a neighbor or relative would sometimes drive into our farmyard, sometimes when it was suspiciously close to mealtime or our mid-afternoon snack of tea and sandwiches. Dad would commence visiting or trading equipment parts or doing machinery repairs with the visitor, and the next thing we knew, one of us kids was sent to find Mum and tell her to set another place at the table for our visitor. Sometimes the visitor brought family members along. One of my uncles from Edmonton, for example, occasionally showed up for the weekend with his wife and 2 children in tow. Although he might have told Dad that he'd be coming out to help on the farm for a few days, by the look on Mum's face, Dad had not bothered to relay that somewhat important information to her. Silently, stoically, Mum always managed to find enough extra food in the freezer, garden, pantry, or all of the above to feed the 7 of us, plus our unexpected visitors. Anyway, on the night of our wedding, in 1976, Mum was inviting another 9 hungry teenagers out to the farm at the last minute. "Okay," I replied to Mum, and I then explained to our friends how to get to the farm from town, a 20-minute drive if they didn't miss any turns. I will never forget my feelings of awe and pride when by the time this batch of excited Saskatchewan teens walked into our farmhouse, the table was filled with enough extra food to fill their bellies and then some. To my recollection, no one had helped Mum with anything other than handing her another pot or fetching some kubasa, pierogies, or baked desserts from the freezer downstairs. She'd done it all herself, calmly and without complaint, a normal sort of thing for a long-time farm woman raising a large family. After the meal, we all drove into town in a caravan of vehicles, made it through the rehearsal ceremony, and carried on to our respective lodgings for the night. The next morning, while my fiancé and his friends were in town and relaxing before the wedding, things on the farm were not as calm. Some members of my family were scurrying around getting lunch ready, but I had other things to do. Decades later, Al's mum was still shocked over having arrived at the farmhouse a few hours before the wedding, only to find that the bride-to-be was not inside getting ready for the nuptials. "Where's Deana?" she asked my younger siblings. "Outside, feeding pigs," came the reply. "On her wedding day?" Al's mum responded in horror. Yep, I had not even considered questioning my involvement with the farm chores that day. Farm animals must be fed and other chores done on the regular schedule, wedding or no wedding. In fact, if there was a special occasion involving everyone in the farm family, we were all expected to pitch in to get the work done on time. I had no idea that this seemed strange to city folks. There were many other memorable moments surrounding our wedding weekend that could only happen at a rural event in the 1970s. Al and I had arrived at the farm 2 nights before the event. So Al was relegated to sleeping in the farmhouse basement bedroom with my brother Alan, the only boy in our family, who was 16 years old at the time. Al was lanky and at 6 foot 4 inches tall, towered over our family by almost a foot. My brother was amazed at his height. Alan in those years was rather shy and remembered being shocked at seeing Al's feet sticking out over the end of the old metal-framed double bed they had to share that night. He wondered how Al could possibly be comfortable there. Al couldn't, of course. Fortunately, it was only a one-night stay for Al. Alone in the farmhouse bedroom together, this was my brother's opportunity to get to know this man who was about to marry his sister, the first in the family to wed. "Al, have you ever seen a real cow?" Alan asked honestly of his soon-to-be brother-in-law. Al smiled and was happy to reply that he had not only seen a real cow, but he'd actually milked a few while visiting friends who were farmers near Regina. Alan relaxed and officially welcomed Big Al into his heart. Our wedding ceremony and the photo shoot afterwards went off without a hitch. Meanwhile, at the community hall before the wedding supper, our neighborly bartenders decided that our teenage friends from Saskatchewan should receive the full benefits of this free bar situation, which was normal occurrence in those days. The neighbors began pouring triples for any youngster that they did not know by name. By the time my paternal grandfather led in singing the celebratory Ukrainian song Nohaya Lita at the start of the supper, one inebriated Regina friend thought my grandfather was singing O Canada and enthusiastically joined in from his end of the banquet hall. Fortunately, almost all of the other 250 guests were of Ukrainian or Polish descent and knew the song well. They almost drowned out our friend Willie's rendition. Also, Willie was balancing buns on his nose while singing loudly and proudly. He'd had more than a couple liquid triples by this time. Thanks, neighbors. The rest of the evening went along as planned, mostly. At one point during the dance, the live band stopped playing in the middle of a song and asked the people on the dance floor to stop stomping because you're throwing us off, they said. It was us, the wedding party, and our friends from Regina who were doing the stomping. You were not allowed to have too much fun at your own wedding in those days. At another point, during a break in the dance music, Al was completely clueless. My older sister had walked over to tell us it was time for presentation. She grabbed one of Al's arms while I grabbed the other, and we led him toward the front of the hall. "What are we doing?" asked Al, with a confused look on his face. "Presentation," I replied. "What?" he asked. "Presentation," I said again, this time slower and louder. Al still had a bewildered look on his face. My saying it slower and louder had apparently not helped him to understand what was about to occur. "What's presentation?" Al asked. Now I too became confused. Then I remembered that Al was a city boy and of English-Irish descent. Maybe he didn't know, which seemed weird. I later learned that Al had never attended a Ukrainian wedding, and I, as a naive Ukrainian-Polish girl of 19, growing up in a community of the same ethnicity, had no idea that our customs were not those used by everyone else in the entire world. When it came time for presentation at our wedding, these different upbringings caused uncertainty. We kept dragging Al to the front of the community hall, and I stood him beside me. We called up our groomsmen to stand with us on Al's left and our bridesmaids to my right. I quickly explained. Everybody comes up and shakes our hands. They drink a shot of vodka, usually with just the men, and they kiss all the bridal party, and they give us money. Most of this sounded gross and downright dumb to me, but the money part sounded good, especially given that we were young, just out of college, and broke. Still, it was all strange and new to Al. After one old baba kissed him and somehow made his lip bleed, he was pretty much done with presentation forever, for our wedding and every other Ukrainian wedding that we ever attended. But we did receive enough money that night to help pay for a honeymoon camping trip a few months later. Another unforgettable event from our wedding day happened when some of our Regina friends offered to take my sister Barb and Al's sister Linda back to the farmhouse at the end of the night. After dropping the girls off at the farm, our friends headed back to town. As one of our best men, Rob Fargo, happily drove down a gravel road a few minutes away from the farm, our friend Blaine suggested from the back seat that Rob should maybe slow down because Blaine thought the road curved up ahead. "Nah," Rob said dismissively and confidently drove on. A few seconds later, The car careened across a T intersection and landed in a huge pile of snow in the deep ditch on the other side of the gravel road. There was no getting out of this snowbank. They had no shovel, no flashlight, no candles, or any other emergency supplies. Cell phones had not yet been invented. It was almost 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning in January and no other traffic on this gravel road. Now what? They decided to check the car for damage. Realizing that they couldn't open the car doors, 2 of them rolled down a window and climbed out into the snowbank to look the car over. Not even a scratch on the rented vehicle. Relief, kind of. They still had to get out of this predicament. They didn't have mitts with them, so Rob and Willie, in their dress suits and shoes, began using their bare hands to move the snow away from the exhaust pipe and the car doors. Finally able to open a door, they climbed back into the car and tried to warm up. Rob wanted to keep the engine running so the 4 teens would be warmer inside the vehicle. Blaine begged him to turn it off so they would not die of carbon monoxide poisoning. Although Rob and Willie had pushed some snow away from the car's tailpipe, the risk of death by carbon monoxide was still a worry for Blaine, who rolled down his window a couple inches to encourage any carbon monoxide to leave the car interior. After a few minutes, Rob turned the car off, to save gas just as much as to keep Blaine quiet. They were soon cold, so Rob started the engine again, and Blaine opened the window again. They repeated this process of warming up, rolling down the window, turning off the car, shivering, and warming up again, while exchanging many unfriendly words over the next few hours. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, a truck came by and a man from Manitoba towed them out of the ditch. The teenagers sullenly drove back to Regina for a couple hours of sleep before having to meet the bride and groom at a local restaurant for breakfast. Only on the prairies can a car from Saskatchewan be pulled out of a ditch in Alberta by a truck from Manitoba, our friends told us when they laughingly recounted their adventure for many years afterwards. Yes, our rural wedding was memorable for these youngsters from the city long after the fact. It was punctuated by one last memory of them leaving Athabasca later that day. A few miles out of town, a still inebriated teenager, the one who sang "O Canada," hollered at Rob to pull over. "Stop the car! Stop the car! The trees are dancing!" Willie yelled. They all laughed and kept on driving back to Regina. So that's one of the stories from Fun on the Farm 3, True Tales of Farm Life, compiled and edited by myself, Deana Driver. You can get it at driverworks.ca or online. Hope you enjoy.